In the near term, the future of the Middle East might come down to what happens in one country.
Lebanon has always been the petri dish, the battleground, the arena for other countries' battles.
I'm Carolyn Beeler.
And I'm Marco Werman. Today we zoom in on Lebanon. Also, attacks on influencers and journalists in Indonesia are threatening the country's young democracy. Climate change activists are also targets.
The climate is very dangerous. It's sending a very dangerous alarm to human rights defenders.
Plus, what humanity can gain by following the Artemis II astronauts in space at a time of deep unrest here on Earth.
Notice the magnificence of this and what people are capable of when they cooperate.
That's all ahead today on The World. This is The World. I'm Marco Werman.
And I'm Carolyn Beeler. Thank you for being here.
A ceasefire has been in place for a day and a half, but you wouldn't know that in Lebanon, where Israeli missiles are currently raining down. Yesterday, bombardments hit several towns right on the heels of airstrikes on Beirut and southern Lebanon that killed an estimated 200 people.
Vice President J.D. Vance has called the question of whether the ceasefire applies to just Iran or also to Lebanon a misunderstanding.
Look, if Iran wants to let this negotiation fall apart in a conflict where they were getting hammered over Lebanon, which has nothing to do with them and which the United States never once said was part of the ceasefire, that's ultimately their choice. We think that would be dumb, but that's their choice.
We start the show by getting a better picture of what's happening in Lebanon and why the ceasefire hangs in the balance. For that, we turned to Kim Gattis, a longtime journalist born and raised in Lebanon. She is currently a visiting professor at Dartmouth College.
Lebanon is the country to which Iran first exported as the Islamic Republic its revolution with the founding of Hezbollah in the early 1980s. And it is the Islamic Republic's most successful export. Hezbollah has grown into a formidable military force and political force since then. So that is one reason why Lebanon finds itself today as the second front in this regional war. But Lebanon has always been the petri dish, the battleground, the arena for other countries' battles. Israel, Syria, the United States, and Iran all fight their wars by proxy in Lebanon. And so Lebanon may feel small and like a by-story, but it is the battleground where the big guys fight their wars. And so I always say, beware of small nations. It is where ceasefires can hang by a thread, regional ceasefires can come undone, and also where the seeds of the next conflict can be sown. Because from my perspective and my research, all of what we're seeing unfold today and this paroxysm of violence actually started in Lebanon in 1982, when the Israeli invasion of Lebanon of 1982 collided, as I said, with Iran's first attempt to export its revolution with the founding of Hezbollah. And so on the shores of the Mediterranean, you had the first seeds of this conflict, which has continued to ripple all the way to today.
And of course, Lebanon's people are caught in the middle here. We know that about a quarter of Lebanon's population has been uprooted due to the recent fighting. More than 1,500 Lebanese have been killed in the past 6 weeks. Can you give us more of a picture of what the situation is like on the ground for people in Lebanon right now?
So Wednesday was really a devastating day of carnage in Beirut. The Israeli strikes happened with no warning. Over 10 minutes, 100 across the country, a country that is the size of Connecticut, a small, tight, densely populated city. Many of the strikes were in Beirut. The strikes seemed indiscriminate. I mean, Israel can say that it was targeting Hezbollah commanders or fighters, but we've seen from the casualty list that many were women and children and innocent civilians. Maybe there were Hezbollah people nearby, but that is not an excuse to target heavily populated residential areas. So there is right now a sense of panic in Lebanon about whether this is going to be endless and how does the country come out of a war that the people don't want to be in the middle of. As you said, we are stuck between Iran, which is fighting its war with Israel via Lebanon, and Israel, which is fighting a war across many fronts and has repeatedly struck Lebanon. This is the sixth war between Lebanon and Israel. Israel, of course, will say that Lebanon and the Lebanese authorities are not doing their job because they should have disarmed Hezbollah. But it's not as simple as that. And it's very clear from Israel's continued need, from its perspective, to target Hezbollah, that this is not something that you're going to resolve militarily, not with Israeli strikes and not with forceful disarmament by the Lebanese authorities.
And here, the U.S. and Israel claim the ceasefire deal with Iran didn't include Lebanon. Iran is saying the opposite. But what Lebanon is saying is not even talked about. What does it say about Lebanon that decisions affecting it are being made without it clearly having a seat at the table?
I want to unpack what Vice President J.D. Vance said, because there are two layers to this. First, he says there's a misunderstanding about whether Lebanon was included, and it wasn't. The Prime Minister of Pakistan put out a tweet on X announcing the ceasefire and very clearly stating that Lebanon was included. And I cannot imagine that the Prime Minister of Pakistan is freelancing and trying to insert this word to make it de facto such that Lebanon is included. This must have been coordinated. So what is more likely happened, this was the agreement. It did not suit the Israeli Prime Minister, who decided to go ahead with the strikes, and then the US administration had to, in essence, cover for that and say, well, actually, it's not included. The other point that J.D. Vance made is that the Iranians are trying to include Lebanon in their negotiations, and Lebanon has nothing to do with it. And there, he is actually right. The Lebanese do not want to be a party to negotiations that Iran is conducting. They want to be represented at the table. Iran should not be negotiating for Lebanon. And as we speak, we're seeing reports now that there are possibly negotiations that are going to be taking place, direct negotiations between Lebanon and Israel. And that is something that will be perhaps divisive in Lebanon or criticized. Why should we negotiate with Israel while they're bombing us? Well, that's how you come to a ceasefire, and that's how you regain your Lebanese national sovereignty, by being at the table to negotiate your own future rather than letting it be in the hands of Iran. Or previously, it was always Syria under the Assad regime that would take over our negotiating position.
Israel recently moved thousands of troops across the border into Lebanon. The Associated Press is calling it an invasion. Is that what you would call it at this stage?
The reason why I think we're still just below the threshold of an invasion is because compared to 1982 and the thousands of troops that poured into the country, this still looks a little bit different. But this conversation hides the fact that southern Lebanon is being leveled. You don't even need an invasion to destroy people's lives and livelihoods and future and access to their land and home. And Israel could empty whole of South Lebanon 5-10 kilometers in by completely leveling it and depopulating it. So they don't even need to occupy the land physically to make that a reality.
Right, because Israel says it wants to create a long-term buffer zone in southern Lebanon, and you are saying that it can do that without an occupation if it levels everything and prevents people from being there.
It could, and that will then be part of the negotiation that Lebanon will have to conduct with Israel to say there is going to be give and take. I mean, you're asking us to do certain things, you have to do certain things as well. And that is partly what went wrong over the last year and a half, because let's remind your listeners that there was a ceasefire between Israel and Lebanon since the end of November 2024, a ceasefire which Israel never respected. There were daily strikes against Lebanon. They didn't make international headlines, but they terrorized villagers in southern Lebanon and in the eastern Bekaa Valley, and on a few occasions in Beirut as well.
I'm speaking with journalist Kim Ghattas, who has spent decades covering the Middle East and writes now for the Financial Times and The Atlantic. I'm curious about Saudi Arabia. You have deep expertise on that country. How do you see Riyadh viewing what is happening in the region right now, or what role is it playing?
There is no love lost between Iran and Saudi Arabia, and Saudi Arabia towards Iran. They've been, arch enemies since almost since soon after the Islamic Revolution took over Iran in 1979. They've had many ups and downs. They've almost went to war in the 80s. Mohammed bin Salman, the crown prince, once likened the supreme leader of Iran, Ali Khamenei, now dead, killed in the first Israeli strikes and American strikes against Iran on February 28. He once compared him to Hitler. So that just tells you the extent to which these two countries don't like each other. And Mohammed bin Salman had also the foresight to try to lessen the tension between the two countries in 2023 when they signed a détente in March, not because they made peace, but because, as they say, hold your friends tight and hug your enemies even closer. And that détente served them to some extent during the upheaval since October 7. And even it served them, I would say, in this latest paroxysm of violence, because while the UAE was hit with the largest number of drones and missiles, Saudi Arabia fared somewhat okay, not great compared to a state of peace, but they fared okay. I think Saudi Arabia's position is very interesting because while I really don't agree with some analysis that says that they wanted this war, they much prefer no war, they much prefer to focus on their economy. After the war started, they wanted to see this come to a conclusion, which would not leave a wounded enemy at their border that could strike them again any minute. And I'm afraid that this is actually where we are now. So I suspect that the Saudis and other countries in the Gulf region are very uncomfortable with the current moment, and they'll be watching very closely to see how this unfolds as well.
I want to go back to Lebanon. You have talked about how that country has seen many decades of conflict. Given that, how does this moment feel to you? Where do you think we are in that larger story of Lebanon?
I have to take a breath in because it's hard. It's really hard. War has defined my life. I'm almost 50. I was born in the civil war in Beirut. And, I grew up on the front lines of a civil war in a no man's land, in a, half-destroyed apartment. We had to flee very often. The 90s were the beginning of the resurgence of Lebanon and reconstruction. And then we had assassinations, including of our prime minister, which, by the way, was killed on a decision made in Damascus and Tehran with Hezbollah's operational help on the ground. So again, the emotions towards Hezbollah are very conflictual in Lebanon. They are supposed to be what they describe themselves as a resistance movement, but they also have a lot of involvement in violence in Lebanon, but also in Syria. And from 2005 onwards, after the assassination of Prime Minister Rafiq Hariri, there's barely been a respite. And so people are really exhausted. I mean, I'm not in Beirut at the moment. I left 10 days ago because I had to come to the US to teach at university. I lived through the first 3 or 4 weeks of the conflict. And it's been the hardest of all the wars. This is, I don't know, I said the 6th war with Israel, and we've lost count. And we don't deserve this. No one deserves this. People are living in a state of terror and feel really helpless. We are always known for our resilience, for our can-do attitude, for rebuilding, and we love our country. And somehow, from our own shortcomings, but also everyone's sort of interference in our politics, we have not been able to live in peace for 50 years.
Why is this the worst?
We have not recovered yet from the last war. And we had not recovered yet from the financial crash and the economic crash that this country has gone through. And we went through the terrorizing Beirut port explosion in 2020, which was the largest non-nuclear explosion in modern times. That's a lot of trauma to carry for a small nation.
Kim Gattas is a journalist for the Financial Times and The Atlantic. She was born and raised in Lebanon and has spent decades covering the Middle East. Kim, thank you so much for this conversation.
Thanks for having me.
You are listening to The World.
This is The World. I'm Marco Werman. It has been almost 30 years since Indonesia set out on its path to democracy, but concerns are now growing that authoritarian tactics to suppress basic rights are returning, given increasing attacks and threats made against activists, influencers, and journalists. From the capital, Jakarta, Dave Grunbaum begins his report with a short list of recent assaults.
A Molotov cocktail thrown at the home of a local social media influencer. A dead chicken on the porch of a climate activist with a note telling him to watch his words. And an investigative news outlet finding a severed pig's head and beheaded rat carcasses on their office doorstep.
In recent years, Indonesia has been experiencing a decline of democracy, especially in the areas of shrinking civic space.
Usman Hamid, executive director of Amnesty International Indonesia, says, compared to the nearly 300 attacks and threats last year, an acid attack last month took it to a different level.
Number of attacks against human rights defenders, human rights activists, journalists, student activists have increased significantly.
In a gritty neighborhood in Jakarta, faded orange circles painted on the street by police mark the scene of the crime. Video from surveillance cameras show what happened here. Andre Yunus was riding his motorbike when a passenger on a scooter splashed acid on him. Andre suffered burns on almost 25% of his body. Andre is a deputy coordinator for the local human rights watchdog Contrast.
Yang menitik tekankan pada reformasi militer itu bukan lagi memperluas komando teritorial dan
He often spoke out against the military's increasing role in government, including his conversation on this podcast. Since the acid attack, he's had several surgeries on his right eye.
It might be a signal to us all that the terror might not only happen to Andre, but it might happen to many of us as well.
Nadine Sharani is a spokesperson for Contrast.
The climate is sending us a very dangerous alarm to human rights defenders.
Huria, who like many Indonesians has only one word in her full name, is an assistant professor of political science at the University of Indonesia and the director of the university's Center for Political Studies.
This is not a random repression, but it is a continuation and also a pattern form of repression and intimidation that specifically targeting civil society activists and aim at silencing critics from the public towards the government.
Huria points to a series of threats during the past several years made against critics of the government.
The use of extra-legal method is not only conducted directly by apparatus, but also by people who are mobilized by the powerful institution, by the military or by the police, in order to intimidate people.
Journalists at Tempo, a local investigative news outlet, were reporting details on how controversial legislation could weaken civilian oversight of the military when the pig's head and beheaded rat carcasses were delivered.
They want to say, shut up to your coverage about the government.
Deputy Editor-in-Chief Bagja Hidayat says Tempo has not backed down with its reporting, but he says other news outlets are self-censoring.
Is there press freedom in Indonesia now?
On the paper, yeah, but the attacking physical, attacking the psychological, and buzzing on the social media to attack us on our credibility is worse than before. So if you ask, this is any press freedom right now? No.
There have been no arrests in those cases from last year. 4 soldiers from the military's intelligence unit have been detained in connection with the recent acid attack, and the military's command says it's conducting a thorough probe, but activists are not satisfied. Again, Usman Hamid from Amnesty.
I'm still having a doubt that they will be willing to, for example, to go after into the mastermind behind the attack.
Hamid says there needs to be a truly independent investigation conducted, and this case needs to be handled in the civilian court system, not the military's, otherwise justice will not be served.
What we will see is just a number of low-level soldiers being scapegoated. The commander escaped with total impunity, and even the soldiers will at the end be acquitted. We have a very strong culture of military being above the law. We have a strong culture of military impunity.
Indonesian President Prabowo Subianto is a former general who was dismissed from the army in 1998 for allegedly ordering the kidnappings of pro-democracy activists. He's promised a comprehensive investigation that pursues everyone connected to the acid attack, calling it an act of terrorism and pledging no impunity. Before this attack, he called critics of his policies unpatriotic and foreign stooges. Activists like Hamid say those words sent signals.
President Prabowo has given the green lights for any actors, both state actors and non-state actors, to attack or to undermine the role of civil society organization.
The Prabowo administration, as well as the military and Ministry of Defense, did not respond to lists of questions.
Jangan diam. Lawan. Jangan diam. Lawan. Lawan siapa? Prabowo. Lawan apa? Impunitas.
At a recent demonstration across the street from the presidential palace, Amnesty's Usman Hamid led the crowd in a chant,
Lawan apa? Impunitas.
saying, "What are we fighting? Impunity."
Now we are here to send the message back that we are not back down. We are not afraid.
For the world, I'm Dave Grunebaum in Jakarta, Indonesia.
And now a few environmental headlines. In Argentina, their Congress has approved a bill making it easier to mine in frozen regions of the Andes, near glaciers and in permafrost. Proponents say this will open up resources like copper and lithium. Opponents say this will impact the country's water resources. Debate over the law went on for nearly 12 hours in Argentina's lower house of Congress before passing by a slim margin.
Next door in Chile, some good news. The story began 60 years ago with the discovery of a small colony of fur seals. The specific species of fur seal was thought to be extinct at the time. The discovery prompted a movement to protect marine life. 200,000 of these fur seals now live off the Chilean coast. And this spring marks a new milestone. In March, Chile's outgoing president signed an agreement to expand marine protected areas, making it the third largest protected marine area on Earth. It remains to be seen whether the new Chilean government will carry through with the plan.
And sorry to bring the mood back down with this next one. The emperor penguin is now in danger of extinction, according to the International Union for Conservation of Nature. Emperor penguin chicks need a dry-ish place to hang out while they wait for their waterproof feathers to come in. They used to do that on ice attached to the coast of Antarctica, but with warming temperatures causing Antarctic sea ice to break up, baby emperor penguins have been falling into the ocean and drowning.
That is a very sad thing to picture, but that is also why we focus some of our climate reporting on solutions. Coming up just ahead, the next installment of our Big Fix series, highlighting the innovative fixes to climate change. Today's solution takes us to Spain. That is next. You're listening to The World. This is The World. I'm Carolyn Beeler. By now, most of us are very familiar with recycling, from aluminum cans to glass bottles. But some things just will not fit in a curbside container, like these. Wind turbine blades. The blades can be more than 100 feet long and are made from tough, hard-to-recycle material. Eventually, they do need to be replaced, though, and the old ones have to go somewhere. The World's Jerry Haddon visited a turbine blade recycling plant in northeast Spain to see how that works. It is part of our Big Fix series, where we focus on the most ambitious efforts to tackle the climate crisis.
Energy Loop's plant is essentially a big metal box. It stands on a dusty plain. In the distance and all around, you can see lots of spinning wind turbines. This is one of Spain's windiest regions. When those turbines' blades wear out, Energy Loop will be waiting. I'm on a tour to see what this facility can do. Inside the factory, there's a giant pile. It looks like sort of dirty snow. And that's the mulch. And outside, they look like giant pieces of almost like airplane fuselages. Piles and piles of long white blades sit on the plant's perimeter, blades that helped make Spain a leader in wind energy, until they either broke or became obsolete.
La gente, claro, hasta ahora no se habían preguntado, pues es verdad, anda. Son proyectos que despiertan mucho interés.
When we explain to people that wind turbines don't last forever, they're often surprised, says Federico San Martin. He's the director of Energy Loop. Most of Spain's first-generation turbines came online in the 2000s, he says, and are nearing the end of their life cycles. That's some 4,000 turbines or 30,000 blades about to be decommissioned. Energy Loop's factory is set to handle up to 50,000 blades a year. It just opened in June, but San Martin says they're poised to cash in, turning those long blades into the pile of snow-like mulch inside. It starts with a huge hydraulic pincer that slices through the turbine blades like scissors through cardboard. It looks like some metallic T-Rex going to town on its prey. A crane then drags and drops the diced blades into a mulcher about the size of a shipping container.
A partir de esa trituración mecánica nos salen, ya obtenemos,
What comes out the other side, San Martin tells me, are even smaller chunks. Those get ground down into bits smaller than your fingertip, he says. We truck that to its final destination, a cement factory. The fiberglass mulch, resin, and other composites work great as a binder in concrete which is poured to make the new foundations for the next generation of wind turbines.
Hasta ahora, el tratamiento, la gestión que se le daban a estos materiales era la de tratamiento y eliminación en vertedero.
Until now, San Martin says, the blades were just buried in landfills, and that's hardly a long-term solution. You're just tossing the material away. Plus, he says, that didn't align with our goal of creating a circular economy, of recycling 100% of old turbines. Blades make up about a tenth of a turbine. The rest of the structure is mostly steel and other metals that do get recycled. Energy Loop is not turning a profit yet, says San Martin, but it has big backers, the recycling multinational FCC and the global Spanish energy giant Iberdrola. There are over 1 million turbine blades spinning around the world, according to industry experts. Only a handful of companies are working on new solutions for the retired blades, beyond just burying them. One's turning them into fuel for cement kilns, and others breaking them apart chemically to reclaim some of the glass and polymers. A handful have come up with brand new uses for the blades as they are. This is a promo video for an Ohio-based firm called Canvas. Canvas slices old blades in cross-sections to make urban furniture. This is Canvas's Brian Donahue describing it to Business Insider in 2024.
We've taken those products and cut them into fillets and turn them into products. And those products are benches and planters and tables for public spaces that people can interact with and enjoy.
Others are even making bridges. Rosie Barnes is an engineer who worked on wind turbines in Australia. Her videos about turbines and blade recycling on her YouTube channel, Engineering with Rosie, get tens of thousands of views. This is her talking about repurposing. She says it's cool, but there's a limit.
People go nuts for this stuff, but there are over 1 million wind turbine blades in the world today. Do we realistically want 1 million wind turbine blade-shaped bridges? I mean, I don't want every bike shelter and playground in the world to look like a hunk of wind turbine blade.
Barnes says it's early days for blade recycling and reuse, whether it's the mechanical chop-shop approach of Energy Loop or more complex chemical procedures, all of which create their own greenhouse gas emissions to some degree. The ultimate answer, she tells me, is making the blades out of different stuff, ditching the current resins that bind the fiberglass.
These cure into a permanent structure that can't be melted again. They have excellent strength and durability properties, but are incredibly challenging to recycle. Researchers are now exploring thermoplastic resins instead.
We use thermoplastics to make recyclable plastic soda bottles, for example.
These can be reheated and melted, which means the fibers and resins can be separated and reused to make new blades.
But that'd be for the next generation of turbine blades decades down the road. It doesn't solve today's problem. For now, mulching the blades for cement feels pretty circular and sustainable, says Energy Loop's Federico San Martin, if not quite profitable.
Está abogando mucho más por tratamientos más sostenibles, tratamientos de recuperación.
We're pushing for a European law that would make recycling or reusing turbine blades mandatory, he says. Burying them in landfills should be a last resort. For The World, I'm Jerry Haddon, Cortes de Navarra, Spain.
We will never be the same. That is the feeling emerging on social media, in text chains with friends, and certainly among the astronauts on Artemis II. If all goes as planned, the 4-person crew will return to Earth tomorrow, having completed their lunar flyby a few days ago. Their sense of awe was palpable. Commander Reed Wiseman reflected on the mission yesterday in a NASA press conference from the spacecraft.
There's a lot that our brains have to process. Human minds should not go through what these just went through, and it is a true gift, and we have a lot that we just need to think about and journal and write, and then we'll get the full feeling of what we just went through.
Chris Hadfield knows that feeling well. He's a former astronaut and was a commander of the International Space Station. He says the images he's seeing sent back from Artemis II are amazing.
The big difference now from when we did it back, 50 years ago, is we have digital photography. So the ability of the cameras is so much better, especially in low light. So for us to be able to take an image of the dark face of the moon lit from behind by the sun and see the corona, or to look at the jagged edges in silhouette of the craters and hills on the moon, and to be able to have them sent down real time. During the Apollo missions, we had to wait weeks before we could see an image because they had to come back. And also the film would be partially exposed because of the high radiation up there. So it's a real technological advantage. And I think it's allowed the world to be on board with the crew way more palpably, as if, every picture they take isn't just bringing that feeling of awe to the crew's mind, but also to millions of people back here real time on Earth. I'm loving it.
Yeah, you mentioned kind of the jagged edges of the craters. I mean, was there any one image where your jaw just dropped?
Oh, well, yeah, that's the beauty of gravity is your jaw drops. But for them up there, they've taken tens of thousands of pictures, and just the ones that they've released so far let everybody in the world truly see our moon and the rugged detail of it. They all are, as you say, jaw-droppingly both beautiful but also scientifically intriguing as we learn more and more about the moon as we start heading back to have the first permanent settlement there.
Chris, how closely have you been following the Artemis II mission, and have you been maybe a little envious about what this crew is experiencing?
I'm following it very closely. I was hoping to be at the launch to take care of the families, but with their 2 delays, unfortunately, my schedule conflicted. But my wife went at the launch, and she said it was just so much more beautiful than even she had anticipated after seeing me launch 3 times. Everybody around her was crying with just the magnificence of what people can do. And I've been in touch with the crew on orbit. I got a nice email from one of the crew members yesterday, and he was just talking about just how this has blown him away, how much better it was than even he was thinking it was going to be after all those years of preparation. That envious? No, I'm not envious at all. I've commanded a spaceship and flown in space 3 times and had contributed, to allowing humanity to be able to do this thing. And so I feel right in the very thick of all these things that are happening. I feel a great sense of shared pride, of accomplishment. And I don't think the 4 of them, we would have been hard pressed to pick any better 4 representatives of humanity to go do this mission so well.
So they've seen the far side of the moon. They've also experienced an eclipse, nearly an hour of totality, which just doesn't happen on Earth with total eclipses of the sun. And they have traveled farther into space than any other human. Commander Wiseman actually reflected on that moment in yesterday's press conference. Let's hear that.
When we watched that Earth eclipse behind the moon, I'm actually getting chills right now just thinking about, my palms are sweating. But it is amazing to watch your home planet disappear behind the moon. You could see the atmosphere. You could actually see the terrain in the moon.
The moon eclipsing the Earth and sun, 54 minutes of totality, which is just crazy. I guess as an astronaut, it must be maybe a little easier for you to wrap your brain around that.
Well, yeah, as you go around the world on a spaceship, you get 16 of those a day. And so I was sort of like, oh, yeah, of course, the moon's going to block the sun. Yeah, great. I just hadn't realized how incredibly profound that was going to look. The part of the sun that is normally invisible because it's so bright, you can't see the fine detail of the outer atmosphere and the filaments of the crown or the corona of the sun. And all of that was like this artistically gorgeous, incredible backdrop surrounding the rugged, harsh blackness of the moon. And I can understand how Reed's palms were sweating because he wasn't expecting it either, and it was so much more thought provoking and beautiful. But that's the beauty of exploration and discovery. It's not what you expect. And if you're willing to take a big risk, it's amazing the returns that we can get, especially where this mission fits into history. I'm delighted with how that eclipse turned out.
I mean, the astronauts on Artemis II have really done their best to describe a frankly indescribable sense of awe. And it's that loss of words, that awe. It's actually a documented phenomenon known as the overview effect. Can you help us understand what the overview effect is, and what is it about seeing Earth from this perspective that literally affects the human psyche?
The overview effect is a book written in the early 80s, just trying to realize what is it that makes people feel awe-inspired, feel that there's something larger and more magnificent than themselves in their normal daily life, to give you a sense of magnificence and humility. And a lot of people get it walking into, like you're in Southern California, Northern California, into those redwood forests, or into a huge cathedral, St. Peter's or St. Paul's or something, where it's just your mind stops. You're gobsmacked with how magnificent something can be. And when you're on board a spaceship, that just keeps happening because the world is so beautiful. And these guys who got so far away they could cover up the Earth with their thumb, they have the rest of their lives now to reflect on what those mean. And mostly it just gives us all a wonderful sense of awe.
Just to bring us back down to earth in quotation marks, I mean, the Artemis II return to the moon has happened amid a time of huge upheaval. It's not only the conflict in Iran and the wider region, but also the Trump administration dismantling the funding for NASA and climate science. Does that make this moment any more poignant?
Poignancy is in the eye of the beholder. I think leaving Earth and going to the moon and back is poignant no matter what you do. And the last time people went around the moon and came back on Apollo 8, our first Apollo mission to the moon, there was the Vietnam War. There was an unpopular and soon to be proven corrupt president. There was a great social strife in the late 60s. It was a real time of distrust and unrest. And what the Apollo 8 crew did just before Christmas of '68 was a great counterbalance to that sort of uneasy ethos. And this is the same. If you choose to pull yourself away from the morbid fascination of the daily news stream and notice the magnificence of this and what people are capable of when they do things right and when they cooperate, I think it can really help.
One more thing, Chris, before I let you go. I'm glad you mentioned Apollo 8 because, of course, they had that famous Earthrise photograph. Artemis II captured an Earthrise, but they also captured an Earth set. What occurred to you when you saw the Earth set photo?
I think what is beautiful about this moment here is just the crystal clear view of our Earth against the harsh deadliness of the barren moon's surface. It's easy to lose sight of the rare jewel-like nature of the Earth that keeps us all alive. It's easy to just sort of take that for granted and to just look at it through the lens of this week or this month or our short lives. To see our little Earth floating in the eternal blackness as this oasis, this little Eden of life, is the reality of Earth. And if you're just against the blackness, it's hard to get perspective. But with the moon in the foreground and to see our Earth set behind it and disappear for a while and then boop, pop back into sight, I think that is worth thinking about. And then decide, okay, how am I going to behave with that perspective? Maybe what should I lean my shoulder against? It really governs the choices that I make in life, having had a perspective that's similar to that. And hopefully the beautiful job of sharing that the Artemis crew is doing will help other people see the preciousness and the shared nature and the commonality of the human experience from that rare vantage point.
Colonel Chris Hadfield is a former astronaut and author. We reached him in Ontario. Thank you so much for your perspective. We are grateful.
Thank you, Marco. And go Artemis, have a soft splashdown.
Astronauts, they're just like us. Okay, at least in terms of condiments.
A jar of Nutella tried to steal the show on the Artemis II as the crew was on their way to making history.
A jar of Nutella was no match for zero gravity.
Nutella got a little free advertising.
Yes, Nutella has now boldly gone where no hazelnut spread has gone before. One has to assume, anyway. A jar floated across the screen in front of the Artemis crew on a NASA live stream of the mission, and that video clip has since gone viral. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney had one concern. He wanted to make sure Canadian astronaut Jeremy Hansen was using a hometown favorite instead.
And I just wonder, a lot of Canadians just want one point of reassurance that the preference is for maple syrup over Nutella on your pancakes in the morning.
There's also some spice in space. In microgravity, astronauts often lose olfactory senses, which can dull flavor, kind of like what happens when you have a stuffy nose. So as former astronaut Garrett Reisman told podcaster Joe Rogan, you gotta bring the hot sauce.
We got like a whole stockpile of it because you pour that on everything so you can get some taste, because otherwise everything tastes really bland.
The astronauts got to take along 5 kinds of hot sauce, according to Axios: Tabasco, Sriracha, Cholula, Frank's Red Hot, and Heinz Hot Taco Sauce.
Marco, do you think they put any of those on the pancakes?
You know, I put that stuff on everything. You're with the world.
This is The World. I'm Carolyn Beeler. In recent months, the UK and Norway tracked Russian submarines that had been spying on underwater infrastructure in the North Sea. In an announcement today, UK Defense Secretary John Healey explained what their intelligence suggests those submarines were doing.
They're designed to survey underwater infrastructure during peacetime and sabotage it in conflict.
The Kremlin responded, saying it had the right to defend itself from, quote, piracy. Katarzyna Zisk is a professor of international relations at the Norwegian Institute for Defense Studies. When we spoke today, I asked her what those Russian submarines had allegedly been spying on.
So apparently, as Defense Secretary John Healey said in his presentation, they were operating in and around UK exclusive economic zone, among others probably. And he suggested that what Norway and UK did was to avert a possible sabotage operations. What is certain that they were operating close to critical infrastructure and attempting to map it, potentially conducting also covert sabotage operations. We do not know whether that is the case, but it seems that is the interpretations of the Norwegian and UK authorities.
And you said this is the exclusive economic zone of the UK, so within about 200 miles at the farthest from the UK. Is that right?
Right. So he formulated this as in and around UK exclusive economic zone.
So the UK says it was tracking these Russian subs for about a month with Navy ships and airplanes. A month is a long time. Did the UK and Norway actually scare these subs off, or do we think they might have gotten all the spying done that they wanted to do and just left?
That's a great question. That's how it was presented by the Norwegian and UK authorities, that they averted possible sabotage operations and forced them to abort their activities. We do not know exactly what this assessment is based on and how they came to this kind of conclusions, but that's the formulation we were presented with.
Is this kind of undersea spying common for Russia?
It is. What is important to understand about the Russian approach is that there is both explicitly stated intent and there are capabilities to do this kind of operations. So the Russian doctrine suggests that in a conflict with a peer nuclear adversary, critical infrastructure such as the cables on the seabed will be attacked early in a confrontation and that the warning time will likely be very short.
So this type of reconnaissance is not new, but lately we've also seen drones disrupt air traffic in Denmark and Norway. We've seen undersea cables cut or damaged in the Baltic, and Russia is the leading suspect there. I'm just curious about the timing. Why is Russia targeting Europe in this way when presumably it has its hands full trying to take over Ukraine?
That's a great question. So the Russian sort of gray zone operations below the threshold of direct military confrontations, they've been observed for the past 15 years quite intensely, right? But it's quite broadly agreed, including among many of the Western intelligence agencies, that the scope of this kind of operations has broadened, they intensified since the full-scale invasion on Ukraine. And there may be different objectives behind the various operations, such as attempting to interfere with transport infrastructure that is carrying the weapons to Ukraine. But these kind of operations may also have the aim to spread fear, chaos, to pressure both the Western societies and the Western politicians to accommodate policies that are more favorable to Russia's interests.
This type of surveillance or sabotage that these submarines were doing, you said, is not super new. I'm wondering if the response from the UK has been. So John Healey, the defense secretary, said today at Downing Street, basically, I'm making the statement to call out Russian activity, and to President Putin, I say, we see you. Does that seem significant to you?
So this kind of operations are being conducted regularly, I would say, in the High North. But what is unusual about this particular case is that we have these firm statements by Defense Secretary John Healey. We had also the Norwegian Defense Minister making a statement. And I think that's quite interesting. It's quite unusual. That's not what we usually would hear. So either this operation was particularly special, possibly dangerous. But I think in any case, we can assume that this is also a case of political signaling to Russia, basically strengthening deterrence by sending this kind of message, showcasing also capability and ability to track submarines that normally operate in great secrecy.
And it's not just submarines that are doing this type of surveillance for Russia, right? It's also civilian ships?
Absolutely. So Russia has been using fishing vessels, civilian ships to map critical infrastructure, for instance, along the Norwegian coast and in other places, other countries in NATO. We know that some of the ships belong to Russian intelligence agencies, and these ships are relatively easy to track.
So Russia is continually trying to be a thorn on the side, or worse, to Europe. Europe is trying to work together to counter those threats. How do you assess who is doing a better job of that right now?
Well, Russia has been working on this sort of integration of non-military ways and means into its military strategy and mapping these vulnerabilities in political, military, economic systems and exploiting them actively. And that's exactly what we observed over the past 2 decades. But I do think that there is a more understanding, a better knowledge, better competence, and it's being taken much more seriously broadly in Europe in order to address these kind of threats. This kind of cooperation, as we just seen in the High North between the UK and Norway, is absolutely critical.
Katarzyna Zisk is a professor of international relations at the Norwegian Institute for Defense Studies. She joined us from Oslo.
For most of the past century, this was believed to be the first human voice ever recorded in 1877.
Mary had a little lamb, its fleece was white as snow, and everywhere that Mary went, the lamb was sure to go.
That's Thomas Edison, creator of the phonograph.
But in 2008, a team of researchers went looking through an archive in Paris and found something they were not expecting. Patrick Feaster was on the team. He is a media preservation specialist at Indiana University Bloomington. He explained it to the BBC.
You discovered a group of recordings that had been made before anybody realized you could play sound recordings back.
The recordings were made transcribing waves as visual patterns on special paper. The device was created by Edouard Léon Scott de Martinville, a French printer, bookseller, and inventor.
And that recording by Martinville of the folk song Au clair de la lune was made 20 years before the phonograph on this day, April 9th in 1857. And now that is the earliest known recording of the human voice. Doesn't necessarily sound like it, but that is a human voice. The World is produced by GBH and PRX, broadcasting weekdays from the Nan and Bill Harris studio in Boston and from the Department of Communication at UC San Diego. I'm Carolyn Beeler.
And I'm Marco Werman. Thank you for listening, and please join us again tomorrow.
The World is supported by the Carnegie Corporation of New York, working to reduce political polarization through philanthropic support for education, democracy, and peace. More information at carnegie.org. by the Lumina Foundation, committed to a fair, universal system for learning beyond high school that offers every American the chance for a better life. LuminaFoundation.org. By the PRX Ambassador Council, whose members include Judy Piggott, the Gruber Family Foundation, the Schmidt Family Foundation, and Gavin Salmonese, LLC. The World's theme music is composed by Ned Porter. The World is a co-production of GBH Boston and PRX.